J.K. Rowling has caused so much harm, not just to trans women, but intersex women, women of colour, and gender non-conforming cis women. She has made life noticeably worse for so many women, yet, because they don't fit into her very narrow idea of what a woman is, she's convinced herself that their lies and the harm she's caused them doesn't matter. That said, people deserve to suffer for merely existing, as we'll see today. But first, a quick content warning for the following: transmisia, intermisia, racism, misogyny, slurs, medical violence, child genital mutilation, and child sexual abuse. If our work has helped you, please consider supporting us via Patreon so that we can keep the channel running. We cannot survive without your support. You can also help us by liking, commenting, and sharing our work on social media. I'd also just like to take this time to remind our viewers that the statements made throughout our videos are the opinions of myself, the host, based on the evidence I have available to me. They are not and should not be taken as unquestionable fact, which is why we reference everything, because we're fallible. Thus we strive to give you, the viewer, the ability to check all evidence yourself in order to make up your own mind, which is what the reference numbers in the top left corner are for, being numbers that match up with the reference list found in the transcript linked down below. As such, we encourage all viewers to do their own research to reach an informed conclusion about the topic. Hi there, my name is Ethel Thurston, she, her, they, them, and we need to talk about J.K. Rowling's continued attacks against intersex people as part of her ever-widening crusade against trans people, how such attacks harm the intersex community specifically, as well as how they harm all women in general. Intersex people are those born with what is considered an atypical mix of sexual characteristics, i.e. their genitals, hormones, gametes, chromosomes, secondary sexual characteristics, and internal reproductive organs. Though this list can be broadened or shrunk depending on context. For example, hormones will often be further divided into hormone production and hormone use, since people with traits such as androgen insensitivity can produce testosterone at rates equivalent to your average cis man, but they cannot utilize it on a cellular level. On the other hand, the only trait doctors are really interested in when they assign gender at birth is external genitalia, dropping all other traits from the list. Sadly, endosex people have historically marginalized intersex people, endosex being the opposite of intersex, i.e. someone born with what is considered a more typical combination of sexual characteristics. Pretty much, endosex is to intersex people what cisgender and heterosexual are to transgender and gay people respectively, history of violence and all. Which brings us to a post Rowling recently made to Twitter, sharing a screenshot of a reply she received on the topic of sex and gender, in which, in response to Rowling's very binaristic view of the field, someone acknowledged the fact that, quote, "It isn't that simple. Some people are born with a vagina that produces small gametes. Others are born with a vagina and internal testicles. Nothing is straightforward in nature." End quote. To which Rowling replied, asserting that, quote, "If a human being has testicles, internal or not, they cannot produce large gametes, eggs, and they are male. Everyone with a DSD is objectively classifiable as a male and female. There are no human hermaphrodites." End quote. I just noticed Rowling's Freudian slip in "everyone with a DSD is objectively classifiable as male and female" instead of all. But even ignoring that, there is so much wrong here, making it difficult to decide where to begin. So let's start with something I actually agree with, and that's the fact that there are no human hermaphrodites. What I disagree with, however, is Rowling's assertion that this is an objective fact of science, like we just conducted an experiment one day to figure this out. And to understand what the problem is, we need to discuss the history of the term. Sadly, to do that, we are going to need to use said word. Therefore, if you're an intersex person and would rather not hear said word beyond the quote, I suggest skipping to the next chapter. If you're an endosex person, meanwhile, buckle in because it's good for you to know this to understand why we don't use the term in relation to people. Returning to the post, what Rowling seems to be getting at here is that intersex people are not hermaphrodites on grounds that, in biology today, said term strictly refers to organisms which not only produce both small and large gametes, but have fully functioning reproductive organs for both, i.e. a phallus and vagina. There's just one problem. That's not what the term originally meant in biology, but was rather a secondary definition added much later, which, with the removal of the original definition, came to replace it. One of the earliest examples of hermaphrodite being used to describe a natural phenomenon was the 14th century word hermaphrodito, referring to a, quote, person partaking of the attributes of both sexes, end quote. This means the word originated in general society as a label for human beings with a visible mix of sexual attributes, not limited by producing both small and large gametes or the presence of both sexual organs, which makes sense when you consider the origins of the word. Namely how it's a reference to the myth of Hermaphroditus, the son of the Greek gods Hermes and Aphrodites, hence the name. Born a boy, 15-year-old Hermaphroditus came across a woodland pond and the water nymph Salmacis, who attempted to woo Hermaphroditus but was rejected. When he later thought she'd left, Hermaphroditus took a bath in her pool, at which point Salmacis attempted to rape him, wishing to be united forever. The Greek gods granted her wish, fusing the two together, resulting in a figure which had enlarged breasts and a penis. Hermaphroditus then prayed that any who bathed in the pool would be similarly transformed, which the gods supposedly granted. From there, it's easy to see how Hermaphroditus' name led to the creation of a term for those who had a visible mix of sexual characteristics. That is why, as time moved on and the scientific community became aware of intersex people as a wider phenomena, that is the term they settled on. Though the term would go through a process of narrowing, with scientists qualifying said label via the production of both small and large gametes, something intersex people with over-testicular DSD are capable of, in spite of lacking these sexual organs to make use of both. This distinction was then used to subdivide intersex people into true and pseudo-hermaphrodites. And it's important to acknowledge that this wasn't a label selected by intersex people themselves, but rather one forced upon them by endosex society. The intersex community, by and large, reject the term. Whilst a few have reclaimed it for themselves, it is viewed as an active slur on account of the word's origin, coming from a mythological story of violation and child rape, along with the word's historical prejudice in both medicine and general society. The term is incredibly stigmatizing, which is why, after years of protest, it was once again changed, this time to only refer to non-human organisms which not only produce both small and large gametes, but have fully functioning reproductive organs for both, as with 94% of all flowering plants. And the non-human part is important, since even if a hypothetical intersex person were born with both a functioning vagina and phallus, they still wouldn't be a hermaphrodite. That is where the label intersex comes in, as a replacement forwarded by the intersex community itself. So, whilst Rowling is correct in that there are no human hermaphrodites, this isn't because of objective science, but rather growing social awareness regarding the historical and therefore entirely subjective language invented by people to categorize other people. The idea that we no longer use their term because of objective science, namely the idea that it's not accurate since intersex people don't produce both small and large gametes whilst also having fully functioning reproductive organs for both, feels like an endosex myth intended to whitewash the term's history and erase the intersex community's struggle to change it. Which brings us to DSD, as used by Rowling in her tweet, a label that has similar issues in how people like her utilize it. In many circles, even to this day, DSD refers to disorders of sexual development, pathologizing intersex people and their bodies as broken things in need of fixing. This is not an evidence-based position, a fact anyone familiar with the topic will know. It is estimated that 2% of all live births are intersex. The reason we don't have accurate numbers, however, is because the overwhelming majority of DSDs are neutral, that is to say, they have no impact on an individual's quality of life, they're just a part of natural human variation and therefore go undiscovered. This has led some within the intersex community to forward differences in sexual development as an alternative to disorders, keeping the acronym whilst avoiding clear stigmatization, though others would rather do away with the term altogether. When I use the term DSD, I am referring to differences in sexual development as requested by intersex people I have worked alongside, though I am currently considering dropping it altogether. If you're an intersex person, and only if you're an intersex person, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, as I am at a crossroads. Do you feel as if the term DSD should be salvaged as differences in sexual development, or should it be abandoned? Both of these examples show that science and the field of medicine are fallible. This idea of science as an objective body of information, unchanging, as presented by Rowling, is an incredibly naive and even dangerous perspective. Science is merely the means by which we, human beings, construct a functioning understanding of the natural world, encompassing both methodology and the pool of knowledge made available by said methodology. It's the best way we have to study the natural world, but that doesn't mean it's free of bias and subjectivity, particularly when it comes to communicating ideas regarding people and our place in the world. To give a few examples of some other times the field of medicine was wrong, just consider race science, eugenics, female hysteria, the pathologization of queer people, the rejection of hand washing, the belief in miasma, and so on. I'm not taking some radical anti-science position here in acknowledging human fallibility within science. Science gets things wrong all the time, and the way we handle that is by being open to questioning our assumptions about the natural world, testing and retesting as we go. The moment we start treating science as an objective truth, a dogma, we lose its most valuable feature, its self-correcting nature. Yet, rather than trying to understand the complexities of the topic, Rowling just lies about intersex people, claiming that if a human being has testicles, internal or not, they cannot produce large gametes, eggs, and they are male. Everyone with a DSD is objectively classifiable as a male or female. This simply isn't true. Over-testicular DSD refers to intersex people who have both testicular and ovarian tissue, including lateral over-testicular DSD, in which an individual has one gonad which is an ovary, whilst the other is a testicle, producing both eggs and sperm. They of course cannot make use of both since they lack either a phallus or a vagina, but they can produce both. It is also possible for an intersex person to have no ovaries or testicles, in which case, this black and white thinking also doesn't work. Fact is, there's a real danger in promoting the idea that all intersex people can be objectively categorized as either male or female, and that is medical violence, including child genital mutilation. Since the 1950s, the standard practice when it comes to visibly intersex infants has been medically altering them in order to bring them in line with endosex standards of male and female. This includes surgical mutilation, with the vast majority of intersex surgeries being carried out under 2 years of age, in spite of there being no medical reason for doing so. Again, the vast majority of intersex people go through life without realizing they're intersex due to there being zero complications. This is not something done out of medical necessity. This is a purely cosmetic practice conducted to put both the doctors and parents at ease. Yet, on top of being completely unnecessary, said mutilation carries with it serious emotional and physical consequences, destroying trust and family bonds, reducing sexual function, and comes with high complication rates later in life, creating the very thing it pretended to solve. So not only is it medically unnecessary in the vast majority of cases, but it's known to be harmful. Yet, in spite of this, endosex sensitivities are prioritized over the well-being of intersex infants. And that's before we even get to the fact that a 2-year-old infant cannot consent to said non-essential surgery, marking this as a blatant violation of bodily autonomy. Violating bodily autonomy is violence in and of itself, separate to any additional harm which might happen as a result. That is why a 2024 resolution by the United Nations Human Rights Council, titled Combating Discrimination, Violence and Harmful Practices Against Intersex Persons, stated that, quote, "The Human Rights Council, guided by the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, expresses grave concern about the violence and harmful practices that persons with innate variations in sex characteristics, including children, face in all regions of the world, including medically unnecessary or deferrable interventions which may be irreversible with respect to sex characteristics, performed without the full, free, and informed consent of the person, and, in the case of children, without complying with the provisions of the Convention on the Rights of the Child." End quote, clearly acknowledging said practice as a human rights violation. Well, what does that have to do with J.K. Rowling and her assertion that all intersex people can be objectively classed as either male or female? How about the fact that it's the primary means by which said methods are justified by their supporters, a fact shown in the prevalence of the phallometer, one of the intersex community's best known political symbols. Said meters are a parody of genuine medical guidelines and were created to draw attention to the arbitrariness of endosex standards, how a millimeter to either side of certain lines is unacceptable and therefore requires surgery. These standards were largely kept hidden from the public to make it seem like doctors had some objective standard to go by in mutilating intersex infants, when they didn't. This is the dangerous myth which Rowling is directly feeding, arguing that all intersex people can be designated male and female, implying that they should just be corrected in line with whichever group they belong to, endangering all intersex people, especially intersex infants. Of course, this is not the first time Rowling has done this. She famously attempted to justify her attacks on numerous cis women of colour via unevidenced assertion that they are intersex, and therefore, in Rowling's ignorant mind, biologically male. For whilst her most recent comment leaves open the possibility that an intersex person can be a woman, her earlier posts do not, and instead assume male by default. Rowling's many victims include Algerian Olympic gold medal boxer Imane Khalif, Taiwanese Olympic gold medal boxer Lin Yuting, and Zambian football star Barbara Banda, all cis women of colour. We discussed this in detail in our recent video, Jill Barrett's transphobia is even worse in 2025, with Jill Barrett publicly defending J.K. Rowling's racist, misogynistic, intermisic, and transmisic abuse. Now, if you're at all familiar with Rowling and her history of attacking trans people, you'll likely recognize said attacks as an extension of her earlier abuse targeting trans athletes, with the argument she makes targeting supposedly intersex women being the same as her arguments targeting trans women. This isn't that surprising, by the way. A 2020 report by Human Rights Watch revealed that there were deliberate attempts to conflate intersex people with trans people in order to make trans participation in sports appear more common than it actually was, stoking social anxieties about trans women taking over women's sports. Rowling is certainly no stranger to this argument, having recently gone after John Oliver for defending trans inclusion. Returning to attacks on Imane, however, Rowling promoted known Russian propaganda that asserted she was intersex. And I say known Russian propaganda on account of the fact that the very same institution, the Russian-led International Boxing Association, claimed to have sent Imane's DNA to for sex testing, the World Anti-Doping Agency issued a public statement making it absolutely clear that they only had the facilities to test for doping and could not conduct so-called sex tests to see if Imane was intersex. Yet, in spite of this fact being made general knowledge, Rowling refused to back down and stopped targeting the athlete, forcing Imane to defend herself in announcing her intent to sue Rowling. I've even heard it speculated that this post might have been created as part of Rowling's defense so that she can claim genuine belief, ignoring the fact that she had no evidence of her assertions when she made them. Fact is, Rowling attempted to justify her racist and misogynist attacks against Imane, a cis woman of colour, solely on grounds that she might be intersex. This is dangerous in the fact that it assumes that endosex people can tell who is and isn't intersex on appearance alone, a fact which, if the 2% estimate has made anything clear, simply isn't true. Yet this narrative leads to countless cis women being targeted as false positives. Butch lesbians, women with short hair, and women of colour have been targeted and even assaulted because their attackers assumed that they were men, that is to say, trans or intersex women, on appearance alone. This was a well-documented phenomena as far back as 2016. Hell, even gender-critical members themselves have been made the target of such bigotry, with one who suffered alopecia being attacked for competing in sports in 2023 and then inside an airport bathroom in 2024, receiving an outpouring of support from the queer community, only to come out and parrot the very same drivel that led her to be targeted in the first place. That is the abusive environment Rowling is promoting to her 14 million followers. But it's also dangerous in that it assumes that said abuse would be acceptable if Imane had been intersex. Keeping in mind that, according to Rape Crisis England and Wales, intrusive questions about a person's private or sex life, commenting on someone's body, appearance or what they're wearing, and spreading sexual rumours, all things Rowling has done, are all listed as possible examples of sexual harassment. The deciding factor? That they're carried out with the purpose or effect of either violating the other person's dignity, or creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating or offensive environment for them, with Rowling ticking every single box, arguably making said abuse a form of sexual harassment. And just to be absolutely clear, sexually harassing someone doesn't become okay when the victim is part of a marginalized community. In fact, if anything, it's worse, since it's potentially hate-motivated, potentially making said abuse part of a hate crime. Fact is, Rowling should not be commenting on another person's body as a means to sexually degrade them, regardless of whether they're intersex or not. And I am fucking sick and tired of the mainstream press refusing to call her actions out for what they are. Since they won't, it falls on us to start flagging these predatory creeps for what they are, regardless of their gender. As for the idea that intersex women are destroying women's sports, call me a radical, but if organised sports can be destroyed by merely including the most marginalised amongst us, then said institution has no right surviving in a civilised world. Now, I don't think intersex or trans inclusion does that, but if you're out there sexually harassing a group of women because you think they endanger women's sports, their sports, you can fuck right off. Sadly, it's likely the first point and not the second one that will be the deciding factor in the case. Violence against intersex people is so normalised, as seen earlier, that it will likely be easier for the prosecution to prove that Rowling simply had no evidence for the claim that Imane was intersex, rather than her actions were unlawful, regardless of whether she was. Though, that is just my perspective as a layman. Hell, even when deciding on a title for this video, I was put in a position where I had to choose between framing this as violence which primarily impacts intersex people, which it absolutely is, or acknowledge the less immediate facts that said bigotry harms all women, while also having its roots in Rowling's better-known anti-trans beliefs. It makes me ashamed to say that I've had trouble getting people to care about intersex rights in the past, with videos that contain the word intersex in the title underperforming. Therefore, I've opted for pragmatism, going broad, before narrowing the focus where it is most needed. Because when Rowling and her little stormtroopers come for one of us, you better believe they're coming for all of us. Though, what do you think? What are your thoughts on Rowling's attacks upon intersex people? What arguments do you think she'll make in court, and how can the prosecution counter them? What ways can we make the LGBT+ community more inclusive of intersex people? Did you notice something I missed? If so, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. And if you appreciate what we do here and want to help keep us running, please consider becoming one of our wonderful patrons who make our work possible. You can also make a one-time donation via PayPal or Super Thanks on YouTube. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Hannah Banghart, Goddess a Lighter, Soshla Wayne Six Denials, Flynn, and Higgins the Seagull. And for myself, Edita, and Levi, take care now.